So he said that Moses parted the sea and allowed the Hebrews to escape the Egyptians. Well, let's go to the 4th dynasty in Egypt. Let's set this story up. There was a pharaoh named Khufu who designed the pyramids of Kemet, the Great Pyramid of Kemet. This particular pharaoh was on the Nile one day in a boat, and some dancing girls were playing music and dancing for him, like a Sunday cruise on the Nile. And so one of the dancers dropped a turquoise necklace into the Nile River. And the women were sad and stopped dancing, and the pharaoh said, "What's the problem?" And one of them said, "Well, she dropped her necklace into the Nile." So the pharaoh summoned his chief priest, a man by the name of Jeddah monk, over to him and said, "Brother, what can you do about it?" So Jeddah, here we pick up the story. Then said the chief lector, Jeddah monk, his magic sayings. He placed one side of the water lake upon the other, and lying upon a potsherd he found the fish-shaped charm. Then he brought it back and gave it to its owner. Now as for the water, it was 12 cubits deep, and it amounted to 24 cubits after it was folded back. He said his magic sayings, and he brought back the water of the lake to its position. So here you can see where the magician or the priest of Kemet actually folded back the Nile River to the dry bed, went down into the water bed, picked the potsherd, the charm up, came back in the boat, and then folded the water back into its place. That brother did that in the 4th dynastic period. We're talking about 2,700 years before the Christian era. Moses was not even born. Moses was not even born until the 19th dynastic period. Under the Pharaoh Ramesses, where he had his confrontation with Ramesses II in the 19th dynastic period, approximately between 1250 and 1,200 years BCE. I'm talking about 2,700. Subtract, somebody do some math. We're talking about well over 1,000 years before Moses was born. This man was parting water in Kemet, in Egypt. How many of you ever heard that before? They never showed you this on National Geographic, on KCET. So the ancient Egyptians believed that the Nile River flowed from heaven. That the Nile River was the most important thing in their life. As you can see the desert here, Egypt was a whole desert. It's completely desert, except for along the banks of the river. So the river was the avenue, the highway, and they called it the highway of the gods, the Nile River. And so they had to command water. Water was important to them. They irrigated. They changed the course of the Nile River. So they had to be the masters of water. And so you had these legends of people who could walk on water, who could part water. The magicians, the whole story of being the masters of water was Egyptian, because they lived there on the water and depended on the water for life. So you can see where the Hebrews came in there and just plagiarized the story, and then they had no geographical, topographical, geological aspects of their area that matched the story. As we will prove it as we move along here. So they said Jesus walked on the water. Moses parted the water. All these were Egyptian stories. Ancient Egyptians had all kinds of stories. So then Moses writing this here. I guess he did write some of this, I guess. It's hard to see how he was writing about, he even wrote about his own death. But we go on, we can see, and when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him for her own son. And Moses was learned in all, let's read along here, and Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds. And when he was full 40 years old, it came unto his heart to visit his brother, the children of Israel. So it says that Moses was mighty, was learned in not just part of it, but Moses had a PhD. Moses had a PhD in Egyptian wisdom. And was not only that, but he was mighty in the words. You remember Ptah created the universe with his words, his magic sayings. Jeddah monk used his magic sayings to part the river. So here right in the Bible, Acts the 7th chapter, Moses is said to have been learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. So what is all the wisdom? What kind of wisdom did they have in Egypt? Moses was a good student. One of the wisdoms that Moses learned was the concept of one God, and it's from this particular pharaoh that he learned it from, a pharaoh named Akhenaten, or Amenhotep IV. This brother, he had a renaissance in Egypt because the ancient Egyptians had all kinds of symbols, on their walls. At no time in Egyptian civilization did they believe in more than one God. At no time. They had a series of deities or symbols which they call netters. Netter is where we get our word nature from. Nature comes directly from the Egyptian word netter. And each god of Egypt represented an attribute of nature. The symbol of gold, silver. Gold was Nub, a Neb, symbolized by Hathor in the south. Silver was symbolized by Set. See, water was symbolized by Noon, also by Happy. Geb was the earth. The sun was Horus and Ra, and Atan or Aten. So he had symbols for manifestative qualities of nature. This was the first chemistry chart. Like we had H2O and CO2 for symbols of the elements. They had a netter or a human form, an anthropomorphic form or human symbol to represent those elements. And they said that before we were mortal men, we were gods. The Europeans said that all those ridiculous ancient Egyptians said that they were gods before they were men. What ignorant Europeans didn't understand was that they were saying that before they were men, that we were the elements of nature. And the elements of nature came together, earth, air, fire, and water, to create life. It was a science. That's why the Greeks say, all of them to a man, that they went there and studied and learned their sciences there in Kemet. As did the Hebrews. And so Moses learned the concept of the one God by Akhenaten, because he said, we're getting too carried away with our symbols. Remember, the ancestors wrote that the whole thing is around the concept of the one God. So he built a whole city called Akhenaten, which was dedicated to the concept of one God. He institutionalized the concept of one God. This is before Moses was born. How many of you knew that? So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all go back to a single scribe, an Egyptian who was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptian, a man named Moses. If you remove that man from the picture, you remove all three of the religions. You remove all three of the religions if you remove that man Moses. The man with the Egyptian name and the man with the Egyptian learning.